Right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of Planning Committee A. I'm Councillor Johnny Crawshaw. I'm the chair of this committee. On my right is Gareth Arnold, who is the development manager, and to the right of Gareth is Jonathan Kenyon, who is the principal planning officer for this application. To my left is Ange Bealby from Democratic Services, and to the left of Ange is Sandra Brannigan, who is the senior lawyer. Down each side of the table are the members of the committee. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. We're not expecting a fire alarm or a fire drill, so if the alarms do go off, we'll escort you out the building. If anybody has their mobile phones, if you could just make sure that they're turned off or on silent. And members of the public, if you need to use the toilets, they're over my left shoulder through the door. Members of the committee can't leave the table during the hearing, so we may need to take adjournments just for comfort breaks throughout. You will notice that some members of the committee have got laptops and some don't. That's because some of us like to use paper copies and some of us prefer to use electronic copies of the reports. If I can just remind everybody speaking, but particularly the members present, if you can just make sure that you have the microphone close to you and you speak directly into the microphone when you're addressing anybody. The acoustics in this room are not great, and similarly for people watching it, just make sure that everybody can hear what everybody is saying. In terms of how today's meeting will run, this is a business meeting of the council that's held in public rather than a public meeting, which means that we have very defined points during which we will accept public participation. So I'll talk to you in a second about how that will work and when we get to it, but if I can just ask anybody present in the room who's not a member of the committee, please don't try to make any sort of attempt at speaking to members of the committee once we're outside of any of those defined moments, please. As I mentioned, we may need to take some adjournments during today's hearing. If those adjournments take place during an application that's being heard, it's very, very important, again, that members of the public don't seek to communicate with members of the committee, and members of the committee know that they shouldn't discuss anything in relation to the application that we're hearing during that adjournment. But I will remind you of that again if we do need to take an adjournment. And then when we're actually determining the applications today, we follow a set format. So for the benefit of anybody who hasn't been to one of these meetings or watched one online previously, we will follow the following steps. We ask officers to talk through the plans. I then invite the committee to ask any questions about clarification on the specific details of the plans. We then ask the officers to provide us with any updates that there may be to the report that's been published. And then we go to the public participation section, and there are people who have registered to speak that wish to address the committee. They have 3 minutes to address the committee, and then I'll invite them just to stay behind if there's any questions that members may have for any points of clarification on any issues that they may have raised. We then go to a section where members can ask the officers any questions about any detail within the report or anything that's been raised by anybody speaking. We then move into debate where we discuss the merits of the application before we then consider the officer recommendation. And every application that comes to us comes with a recommendation from the planning officers. So we consider that the recommendation first, and if the committee wants to do anything different than the officer recommendation, we then discuss that after we've first considered that recommendation. So that's how each application will work. I'm just making a point each time when we start these meetings just to remind everybody, both members present and people watching, what exactly our role is today as members of this committee. So just to be clear, we're not here to scrutinise every last detail of a scheme that's put before us. Our job is to consider the planning issues that have been set out within the reports and then to come to a decision based on those differing things that have been brought to our attention. The reports that we receive contain summary information, summary positions that come from a range of different contributors who will have had detailed and lengthy discussions at times before they've arrived at those positions. And as mentioned, they then conclude with a recommendation which constitutes the view of the planning authority. And Gareth and Jonathan are both here to be able to sort of elaborate on any of those positions that have been reached or give us further context if needed. But when officers are giving us their advice, they're doing so giving a judgment or a professional opinion based on qualifications, knowledge, experience. It's not just a sort of this is what I think sort of thing. As mentioned, members will have the opportunity to ask questions of both the public participants and the officers, but any of those questions do need to be planning related questions. And I have officers who will advise me if we think we're sort of going off track. I will rein people back into making sure that we are purely discussing the material planning considerations when we're getting to our overall balance. And one final thing that I'm just going to mention, just specific to today, this meeting is taking place during the pre-election period for the Kexby and Wigington by-election. So just to remind everybody present and anybody watching, this planning committee is always apolitical. It doesn't matter what political affiliation we may have as councillors, we come to this in a neutral way, and our decisions are based entirely on the material planning considerations alone. So having said all of that, not with any intention of deterring or inhibiting discussion or debate, I will move us on to the main agenda. So the first agenda item 1 is apologies. We have 3 apologies to today's committee. So Councillor 1 sends apologies and is substituted by Councillor Fenton. Councillor Culwick has sent apologies and is substituted by Councillor Widdowson, and Councillor Whitcroft has sent apologies and is substituted by Councillor Ben Burton. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. So does anybody have anything they wish to declare in relation to today's applications? Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a close personal relationship with somebody who's been heavily involved with the planning application in agenda item 4B, and I've reflected on it, and I don't think I can approach that application with an open mind, so I won't take part in that decision making.
So just to confirm, at that point you will withdraw from the committee and you'll leave the room. Thank you. I'm not seeing any further hands for any other declarations of interest, so I can move us on to agenda item 3, which is the general remit public participation for this committee. We've not had anybody register under agenda item 3, so I can move us then on to agenda item 4, which is the plans list. And agenda item 4A is the land to the south and east of the cemetery, New Lane, Huntington, York. So if I can invite Gareth, are you going to start the presentation and take us through?
Yeah, I'll go through the drawings such as they are for this outline application. So this is a planning application in outline. Say land to the south and east of the cemetery, New Lane, Huntington. Google image on the screen behind is to show the context of the site. So I'll just go slowly around the outline of the site with the highlighter. Members can see the Vanguard site, the community stadium, Monk's Cross, Porter Cabin, and then the wider Huntington area. Land to the north, the cemetery, land still with one-time planning permission for an extension to the cemetery. The planning application site cuts into what appears to be their land, but it's part of this planning application in that northeast corner. And then this land to the north is land which was granted planning permission for housing development by the Secretary of State last year. It's an application and there's a close-up of the application site. It's an application for 107 dwellings. All matters are reserved apart from access, which is taken from New Lane. The scheme proposes 100% MPPF definition affordable housing. The site's considered to be in the general extent of the green belt, and that's set out in paragraphs 5.2 to 5.16 of the report. We have an indicative. Let's go back to that one actually. One of the points here is the access points onto the cycle path. So this is a cycle path that links New Lane to the wider cycle network. So this is the back of the Monk's Cross Park and Ride site. So there's a number of access points from the development onto that cycle path. There are also a series of hedgerows on the site. That's better illustrated on this landscape plan that's submitted. So the intention is to retain the majority of the east-west central hedgerow tree line, which is the current field boundary. There's quite a substantial field boundary to the south, but that's outside the application site and in the boundary of the site to the south. Some close-ups. So New Lane. This is taken from the west, so north and south along New Lane. The extent of the planning application site and its relationship with New Lane at the moment. The photographs just illustrating the current boundary with New Lane and its relationship to that street. This is from the south, so that's the existing bus shelter, which is roughly the southern extent of the site, heading off into the fields to the east of that. This is the highways proposals plan. Members will have seen reference to the proposals for works to New Lane. So up in that northern end, connection to the cycleway, there's a signalised toucan crossing. Further down, an uncontrolled pedestrian crossing. The site access, new bus stop and a 3 metre wide footpath cycleway along the extent of that New Lane frontage. There is an update on the printed papers that have been circulated to members.
If you just hang on with the update, I'll come to the update in a second. Because I'll just invite members if they've got any points of clarification that they want on those plans that you've just gone through. So Councillor Eyre and then also Councillor Clark.
Actually, it was on the one you had on, actually, Gareth. Just to get some clarity up. So as I understand it, the off-road cycle lane will be what is now off, not part of the main highway. So it'll be on, it's within the. So my question then is, what happens at the southern end? So obviously the northern end that will clearly feed into the cycle lane. What happens at that end there? So that will just, I'm imagining that now will run straight into a hedge.
Hiya, Jonathan Kenyon. So my understanding is that the drawing is done on the basis that the application for the island children's centre to the immediate south happens, so that it would continue, the cycle lane continues in front of that site.
I get that, but that's hypothetical and we can't consider that. So on the basis of the plans we have, basically the cycle route would just end and there would be a hedge. Because the cycle route proposed, I'm guessing, is roughly where the hedge is at the moment. So the hedge will be taken out and replaced with the thing. So when you get to the end of it, will be just hedge.
Yeah, that would be correct in that if the scheme for the island is never implemented and never happened, the cycle route would then, it would need to be redesigned and it would need to join the road if that piece of infrastructure along with the island doesn't happen.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. It's just a clarification. You mentioned or referenced the other developments. Is that immediately north of the cemetery, or is there?
So the land,
Is it?
the so this is the land with the planning permission, which was granted permission by the Secretary of State.
Okay,
And that terminates to the north of the cemetery and what I'll call the cemetery extension to the west, to the east.
Okay.
So the cemetery and then this area, this piece of land here is the intervening land use. And then just going back to, and then this the extreme eastern end of that wedge of land is part of this application site, which is shown to be a meadow.
thanks. I had a second question, if that's okay, and just to indicate where the island is as well, that development, just for context, please.
The island site is to the south.
Okay, councillor Eyre?
So I got very interested by that drawing because it was big enough to see. The one I was talking about last time, so the proposal is for the bus stop to be sat behind what could potentially be a two-way cycle lane. In essence, it's the whole floating bus stop idea, isn't it? Which I didn't think was. So assuming if the hypothetical happens, you will then have a two-way cycle lane, I'm guessing, running the full length of New Lane with the bus shelter the wrong side of the, so people will have to get from the bus shelter across the cycle lane to the bus.
That's what's shown on the. That's what's shown on the drawing. I'm not sure it was being intended to be two-way there, but I doubt whether there's anything to stop people cycling two-way. But yeah, so that's the proposal out.
Just on that, so is it one way or two way? Because I would have assumed people will be going up that way to join the cycle route to get to Vanguard, as well as people coming from Vanguard off the cycle route and coming
I guess they could, yeah. Yeah, I don't think it's delineated to be specifically delineated either way, but yeah, you could go both ways.
Okay, any further questions or clarification on the plans? Councillor Melly?
Does the installation of this new cycleway or pavement mean the loss of any hedgerows or anything that are there currently?
Yes. Yes, it does. There's a line of, you can see the line of the hedgerow here, which would be removed for both the access and the footpath cycleway. So that's roughly here, this area.
And also I think it would be helpful to know whether that proposed new cycleway is one way or two way when we're assessing the transport links to this site. And the various
it's not
routes.
specified. There's nothing to prevent people cycling either way.
But in terms of whether it's LTN 120 compliant and that sort of thing, that width would vary depending if it's one way or two way. And
the width depends on the 3 metre, 4 metre. My recollection depends on the number of users that are expected, rather than it being two-way. But we can see if we can check that one out, but I'm not sure we'll have that answer.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, councillor Fisher?
Thank you. It's not just the hedge I'm concerned about. There's also quite a number of self-seeded reasonable size ash trees along that frontage. Would they have to go as well? You can see them fairly clearly. There are just that section there.
Sorry, that is that's the row of trees that are to be removed.
They are to be removed, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, there'll be obviously an opportunity to ask further questions, as we get to the appropriate stage. But Gareth, sorry, Jonathan, I think you've got the update, haven't you?
Yes, thank you. Committee update. And so we've circulated a copy of the update to members. The first point on there, in terms of the representations, we did get an objection that was signed by the three ward councillors. That was just summarised with the other objections in the officer's report, so we've pulled that out and showed you the objections that they specifically made, so that they're detailed in the update. Second point in the updates, in the appraisal, in paragraph 5.10, where we've referred to the impacts on the green belt and the 5 green belt purposes, we've just supplemented that, provided some extra information to members with clarification as to why we don't feel there's an adverse effect in respect of the other purposes that weren't talked about in detail in the report. So that covers purpose 2, which relates to neighbouring towns merging into each other. Purpose 4, in terms of the setting and special character of historic towns. And purpose 5, in respect of urban regeneration and encouraging recycling of derelict and other urban land. In paragraph 5.34, there's an error in the text. It summarises where trees and hedgerows are to be retained and to be removed, and it incorrectly refers to the west boundary in paragraph 3.4 when it should refer to the east boundary. It's otherwise correct in the remainder of that section that talks about trees and hedgerows. So yeah, 5.33 would be the correct wording, yeah. In terms of the planning conditions, there are 2 extra conditions that we've recommended and we've set those out. One of them is in relation to the accommodation mix, which is shown indicatively on the plans, including the plan that we have up at the moment. There's a proposed condition to not explicitly secure that mix, but to ensure that the number of houses, sorry, that have 3 or more bedrooms don't exceed 10, which is aligned with what the mix is shown. So that would ensure protection that all apart from those 10 houses are 3 bedrooms in size or less at the time of construction. And so that's aligned with what's shown indicatively on the plan, and the reason for that condition that we're proposing is to ensure that the accommodation mix is appropriate. And so it follows policy H3 we have, which refers back to our local housing needs assessment, and also so it's in accordance with the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan policy H2, which again talks about housing mix in new developments. The other proposed condition we have recommended is a phasing plan. So that would require us to approve the phasing and times at which the highway network is installed in the open space. So there's clarity as to which sections of road will be provided and which open spaces will be provided before certain houses are occupied. If indeed it does come forward on a phased basis. And that's the extent of the update.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So we will now move to the public participation section. We've got a couple of people registered to speak. The first person I'll invite to speak is Councillor Chris Colwick, who is the ward councillor, speaking in objection and representing local concerns. Councillor Colwick, you're obviously very familiar with the protocol, but if I do think you're running over, I will try and give you a little wave, 3 minutes, and just start on your own time.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. Every planning consideration comes to a question of balance. The question is, does the benefit of the supply of a number of affordable properties on this particular Greenbelt site outweigh the negative impacts and consequences sufficient to warrant the description of very special circumstances? Clearly, on the one hand, there is a need for affordable accommodation in York, but this does not mean that any so-called windfall site, first come, first served, simply trumps every other planning consideration. So on the one hand, a number of affordable properties, on the other, the combined weight of the many disadvantages to take into account should this be approved, especially those impacts for which there will be little or no mitigation. Not least is the lack of any significant contribution to health, education, and sport provision. Even now, getting an appointment with a local GP is next to impossible, but all local services are already stretched. It is the cumulative effect of the proposed development, along with the many other developments already approved in this ward, in many cases without significant Section 106 contributions, that would create an unacceptable impact on the existing poor services for local residents, especially, but not only in health and education, not to mention for those potential new tenants. There's also the loss of one of the last open spaces in the ward, a ward which, unlike many others in the city, has no significant parks and substantial open spaces, except retail parks. And the loss of the vital green wedge, or part of the vital green wedge, which serves to separate developments and facilitate biodiversity. There is substantial harm to the greenbelt. This loss of open space, along with population growth, would put an inevitable and unnecessary impact on the uniquely important Strensall Common, hence the justifiable concerns of Natural England objecting to the proposed development. Given the cumulative impact within the zone of influence of Strensall Common, SAC and SSSI, we question that policy G12A in respect of effects on Strensall Common is actually satisfied. Understandably, there is little local support for this development. This is not NIMBYism. There is and has been support for significant housing development within the ward in recent years. 4 housing developments have been completed. Other developments have been approved, with some 970 homes nearby on Monks Cross Link Road, a proposal supported by 87% of local residents through the Huntington Neighbourhood Plan, the same plan which supports the retention of the greenbelt here at the application site. But all this development increases the number of homes in Huntington by more than 25%. Local residents are beginning to say, more than beginning to say, enough is enough.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just invite any members have any questions for Councillor Colwick. Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming to speak to us. Do you know how far this site is from Strensall Common?
It's within what they call the zone of influence in terms of the likely impact. I know that Strensall Common was of real concern in the consideration about the other site just north of the cemetery. And what I'm referring to here is the cumulative impact in terms of the additional population and loss of open space. In terms of the question of number of miles, I'm sure that officers would be able to answer that, but it will be a couple of miles, I would say. But it is the largest and most significant open space access through that part of the city, where the ward really has very little accessible public space.
And could you tell us anything about what the transport links are from this site to Strensall Common? How easy is it by different modes of transport for people from this site to get to it?
Well, the bus services that run through Huntington run on through to Strensall, and it will be possible to access the common. But I would imagine that most who use the common would be doing so using vehicles, using their own cars rather than public transport.
Okay, next I had Councillor Fenton, and then I've seen you, Councillor Widdowson, as well.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering what engagement there'd been with ward councillors, parish council, local residents in the development of this proposal, because we've had other proposals that have come to the committee where the developers have done some sort of pre-application engagement locally. I just wondered if you were aware of anything.
Very little is the answer. We were made aware of the intention of this at an early stage, but beyond that, I'm not aware of any.
Okay, and Councillor Widdowson.
just to follow on from Councillor Kelly, the sorry, Melly, I'm sorry. My understanding of Strensall Common, I've got a problem with my teeth tonight. My understanding of Strensall Common is that it is a site of special scientific interest. It has been on a number of the planning applications I've been involved with. It is a very sensitive site. The big issue always seems to come around from walkers, specifically dog walkers, and the massive impact that they can have on that site. When I was reading this, I didn't see anything that helped mitigate whatever else in that area. And I do know that that's repeatedly come up over the last 4 or 5 years where I've been involved in it.
That's true. That's true to say.
The most people that do go to Strensall Common do go in their cars, which again creates an issue. And what would you like to see if there was anything that could help mitigate those issues?
It's difficult to see how that could be mitigated given how little open space there is within the ward now. And I just think back personally to the experience of the lockdowns of COVID, that for many in that part of the city, Strensall Common was the place to go in order to get some open space and to have regular walks. The area is not well served.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. The application for me was quite a game changer in my mind of how neighbourhood plans would be regarded importance-wise, in that it seems to be given no importance at all. Is that something that you think is a fair assessment? I mean, I don't know how involved you were in the neighbourhood plan. You presume at the very least you were taking interest as ward councillor, but when that was being formulated, would you have envisaged a site such as this coming forward with next to no opposition, seemingly in the form of a neighbourhood plan it was totally at odds with?
I wasn't personally involved in developing the Huntington neighbourhood plan because I was aware of it, but I'm not and never have been on the Huntington Parish Council. But I think it would be entirely understandable if those who work so hard to put together local plans see them having absolutely no relevance or effect when it comes to making decisions. And clearly the Huntington local plan took account of significant additional development within the ward, but was careful to protect those areas that were important in terms of maintaining the greenbelt and greenbelt purposes. And clearly this area does fulfill those greenbelt purposes, and that was recognised even by the Secretary of State in comments relevant when addressing the site north of here, on the north of the cemetery. So I think that the Huntington local plan should carry appropriate weight and doesn't appear to have sufficient weight within the application as we see it before us.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands for any further questions. So thank you very much for your time this evening, Councillor Colwick. If you'd like to take your seat back in the public gallery, and I will then invite Adam, is it Hurld? Sorry if I've pronounced that correctly, who's here speaking on behalf of the applicant Joe Mast, and you're also joined by Adam Smout and Philip Holmes. So you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. If I think you're running over that, I'll give you a little heads up to say you've got 20-30 seconds left. And then if you can just sit tight in case there's any questions from members, and just start in your own time. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I'm Adam Hurld, a director of Joe Mast Developments, the applicant and the developer of this proposed scheme. Joe Mast is a long-established property development investment business focused on delivering and managing residential schemes across the north of England. We've completed multiple affordable housing schemes working in partnership with registered providers. Our partner for this proposed scheme is Together Homes, who we're working on a number of developments with. They're one of the largest providers of affordable homes in the north of England, with a proven track record of delivering and managing schemes throughout Yorkshire. I welcome the officer's recommendation for approval for what is a 100% affordable housing scheme, and will help address the critical need for a range of genuinely affordable homes for local people who have been locked out of the housing market in York for many years. Recognising the particular local housing challenges and working with Together Housing, we're proposing to go further and offer a period of exclusivity to local key workers such as NHS staff, social and care workers, school workers, civil servants, and emergency service workers, should the plans be approved. This proposed scheme occupies a highly sustainable location with strong pedestrian, cycle and bus links, and in close proximity to everyday services and facilities. The ecological and landscape aspects of the scheme have been considered thoroughly and designed accordingly, with generous public open spaces, retained hedgerows and trees, and ecological mitigation areas providing a net gain in biodiversity terms. Bordered between existing consented residential development to the north and west and Monks Cross to the east, this application represents a logical development site. And as identified in the committee report, this is a windfall site that is needed by the city to contribute to York's affordable housing needs. As such, I respectfully ask the members to support the officer's recommendation and approve the application to enable us to commence the reserved matters planning process without further delay and enable early delivery of these homes. Thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you very much. So again, just inviting questions from members. I've seen Councillor Eyre first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A bit confused by that comment you made about a period of exclusivity. Are you suggesting that the committee add a condition to this planning application that restricts you to who you can sell properties or rent the properties to for a period of time?
I don't know how technically you would secure that, but what I'm saying is we're focused on a marketing period specifically for key workers. I understand from our discussions that key workers, through our consultation discussions, that key workers was a key part of this scheme. How that would be secured.
In anything else you've done, because I would imagine that there's no such condition that could be applied to it. So is there any example anywhere of where there's been any kind of binding commitment through a planning process to do that, or is it literally just your word?
Okay, from a technical point of view, I don't know. Maybe
Just pop your microphone on.
Sorry, I was just going to add this, that offer there is an offer. It was there from the outset of submission of the application. I think in terms of planning and how it would be secured, well, the issue is whether it's necessary and reasonable in terms of it, and the council's view is clearly that it's not necessary to make the development acceptable. It's acceptable in other terms, and there's other benefits which outweigh any harms. So it's not required, but nevertheless, it's there as a genuine offer, and that is what will happen.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Melly next, and then right.
Thank you, Chair. The homes that would be for social rent, if this development was to be approved, would any of them be for nominations from the council, from their council housing waiting list?
Just if you could just make sure your microphone's on when you're answering. They tend to drop off.
Okay.
So just you should have a green light on.
Happy for that to be the case. Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Stewart, I saw you next.
Thank you. Yeah, it's partly a question for the officers and obviously yourself as well. Now, officers have referred to the site as a windfall site, and you've referred to it as a windfall site. In my history of the local plan, it didn't occur to me that any windfall site would be a green field. I always thought of windfall sites as a car garage no longer needed or other such brownfield. Can you explain what you view as a windfall site? And particularly what makes this site different from every single place everywhere in York being a windfall site? I've got sort of a bit of a follow-up, probably with officers, because if this is meeting the test for a windfall site, it seems it certainly doesn't mean what I thought it meant on our local plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say that. Well, a windfall site technically would be any site that's not provided for as an allocation in the local plan, or is being brought forward through that. It's over and above what is foreseen and projected through those allocations. So when part of the council's assessment of this application in terms of need is based on what the affordable housing need is for the city, which is some 9,000 affordable housing units required. Their local plan seeks to aim for 45% of that to be met, of the 9,000 plus. Part of that will be met by site allocations. Part of that, there is an allowance made for some windfall sites, which by definition, we don't know what or where they are. There is no technical definition of that, other than it's something that can come forward at any point that's not accounted for. There is an allowance made for that in the projections of the local plan. Even with those projections, the council are saying we're not meeting, and the council has no route to meeting the affordable housing needs to get to 45% of that. So the reference in the officers' report, as you say, it's a question for officers, but there is a reliance on other sites to come forward beyond that if the council has a chance to meet its affordable housing needs. Any windfall site could be that. It could be an infill site. It could be a greenfield site. It's something that's brought forward.
Is that a supplementary question, Councillor Widdowson? Yeah.
I don't know whether it's for the applicants or whether it's for the officer. My understanding is that the local plan delivered the number of homes that we required and that we weren't looking at greenfield.
The report does set out some of the definition of a windfall site and some of the requirement in terms of numbers, and it does. We'll get to it.
Okay.
I'm sure, and certainly put the question to officers when we get to the officers' question. But the report does set out why this is considered a windfall, and how the numbers work as part of the very special circumstances. Councillor Fenton, I had you next.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a question around access. So earlier on there was a few questions for officers around the shared use cycle footpath. So I just wondered if you could clarify whether in designing it, the anticipation has been it would be for two-way cycle traffic and pedestrians, and whether all options had been explored. There are shared use paths around the city. I think they're always seen as not as optimal a solution as a sort of segregated footpath, cycle path. So just wondered what work had been done to explore whether something more segregated had been possible and how this solution was arrived at.
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me okay? Thanks for the question. We did consider whether you could have a segregated cycle lane in both directions operating in the same place as the footway cycleway has been shown, which is a two-way cycle lane. It would operate in a similar way as the cycle path that runs along the northern edge of the site along the cemetery. The problem with providing a segregated cycle track as well as the footway along New Lane is that more of the existing hedge would need to be removed to facilitate that. So the two-way shared cycleway and footway, as we've shown at 3 meters width, is, I suppose, the best compromise solution to keep as much of the hedge and trees as possible.
Councillor?
Yeah, I think I never thought I'd say induced demand or referring to anything other than the York Outer Ring Road, but I think my concern with this, following on from Councillor Felton, is this New Lane isn't a very good place to cycle, in all fairness. So I think the perception would probably be that you would put this in and that would be from use from the site primarily, or people accessing the site. But I think because New Lane isn't particularly good, there will be an incentive for people going north up New Lane to actually nothing to do with that. People from my ward, for example, coming off Malton Road, actually cross over the road and use that cycle road to access Vanguard. So have you factored in sort of significant additional usage outside of from people in the surrounding areas rather than just people who might be living on this particular site? I've explained that incredibly badly.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean. I think that's part of the rationale for the signalised crossing that we worked on with your officers to allow for cyclists to cross the road, joining the cycle lane from the existing cycle lane.
I think that's what's part of it, because I think that's actually not going to be used as much as people would, because if you're coming up Malton Road and turning left onto New Lane, you're less likely to travel on the road, which is quite narrow, to where that signalised crossing is to go across. There is signalised crossing, which actually allows you to go across New Lane, where you would then join the hypothetical cycle lane of the island, and that would then allow you to off-road all the way from the Malton Road end of New Lane, all the way up to the new cycle lane to Vanguard. So it would become an incredibly popular route on that side of the road for people accessing from the city centre side up Malton Road. That was,
So yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. I suppose we've got the opportunity to use both crossing points and allow for it as far as we can within the constraints that we're working within as well. We want to minimise, the hedge and trees that need to be removed as far as we can.
Okay, any further questions, councillor Clark?
Thanks, Chair. You mentioned it was a highly sustainable location. I'm just interested because there's lots talked about encouraging active travel, pedestrians and cyclists. I just wondered whether you'd thought about car use there. And I appreciate it's an outline application, so the detail of what cars will be where may be scanned at this point. But I'm just thinking, as what has been considered in relation to car use of the site and whether it actually can be reduced.
Yeah. Do you mean in terms of sort of measures that we're?
As in, how car free could it be? I think in one phrase.
Obviously the details of the parking will need to work through with your officers as part of a reserve matters application. I suppose our view is it's very accessible in relation to the public transport. It's close to the park and ride sites. There's a lot of amenities and facilities that within a walking distance that is suitable for the vast majority, for most people to use if they can. And then there's opportunity to explore that, I think, in the reserve matters process with your officers, whether we could minimise parking on site.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Looking at the affordable housing numbers, this is a green belt application, so typically it'd be based on the highest level of affordable housing you can provide, which is 100%, but you've brought forward the kind of baseline level of social rent as part of that mix in terms of the expectation with quite a high number of affordable rent and then shared ownership. Can you just talk through the logic behind that approach to having the minimum social rent and then a kind of high rate of affordable rent, because it's quite difficult in the city because a local housing allowance is quite a gap between affordable rent and social rent essentially. So I'd just kind of like to see the thinking behind that mix put forward on a greenbelt site.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, the first thing to say there is, as you say, it's not set yet. So the threshold where we have an agreement on is a minimum level, and we don't know what that would be, but the agreement is that it doesn't fall below that. Any future mix has to take account of the local housing needs. We'll do that at that time. So we're not bound to doing that. It's a threshold, but a lower threshold that we don't go below, and that's protected by the agreement.
Okay, I'm not seeing any further hands for further questions, in which case thank you all for your time this evening. If you'd like to take your seats back in the public gallery, and I will then move us on to members' questions to officers. So if members have any questions on the report or anything that they've heard, I've seen Councillor Melly's hand first and then Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in Natural England, in their response, as part of the consultation, they've said that based on the nature, scale and location of the proposed development, it's very difficult to conclude no adverse effect on site integrity for Strensall Common Special Area of Conservation. And they've said that the mitigation measures proposed, they don't consider them to be sufficient. And I couldn't see much in the report or in the conditions about what those mitigation measures are. Could you tell us more about those mitigation measures and the officer's view on whether they're sufficient or not? Natural England have said that in their view, it is possible to mitigate the environmental harm. So I'm just wondering what could be done.
Yeah, so there is a specific paragraph where we covered it in the report. But in summary, the comments that we got from Natural England came before we got the Secretary of State's decision on the application site to the north, which very much discussed this issue in detail and showed how they felt that policy was addressed. And this site is no different to the assessment that was undertaken at that site to the north in terms of its impacts on the common.
The mitigation measures that there are, how are they conditioned? Which kind of condition are they in? Are they part of specific plans that are conditioned, or?
There would be access to existing walking routes and open space and access to the open space on the site to the north that's under construction. So there's nothing outside of the application site that we're trying to, or is necessary to seek through a condition.
Councillor Fisher, I think yours was supplementary on this.
I was just going to add.
Was yours also supplementary as well? Okay.
Yeah. Can I just add to that? Because this is entirely an outline. So we have indicative drawings which show open spaces laid out around the sites, but that will come forward when we deal with the reserve matters for the layout. So how those routes around the site work will be worked through at that stage, but on the basis of this indicative layout in front of us, which, as Jonathan said, we consider to be suitable mitigation following on from the decision that was made on land to the north.
Okay, I'm going to come to Councillor Fisher for supplementary, Councillor Clark after that, and Councillor Eyre, is that also supplementary on this? Yeah.
Thank you. My question was going to be very similar to what Councillor Melly was saying. On page 64 of which is the next application, concerning the Welderick Ings and other associated sites. Paragraph 553 says the habitat regulation assessment is the process that is the competent authority, the local planning authority, must undertake to consider whether proposed development is likely to have a significant effect on a European site designated for its nature conservation interest. Strensall Common is a triple SI, which gives it the highest level of British protection, but it's also an SAC. It is listed on Annex 2 of the European EU Habitats Directive, and that means it is an extremely prominent and important site. It's also 3 square miles in size. It's a huge site. And the point is that will do nothing to actually mitigate against the people who want to walk their dogs for a long time. Has an HRA actually been undertaken for this site, or was an HRA undertaken for the site to the north? Because if it wasn't, I'd feel the planning law had been breached.
There were, for both applications, there were shadow HRAs, which are undertaken by the applicants and checked by the council's ecologist. The one for the site to the north was thoroughly assessed. It was one of the reasons why there was a delay to the decision following that appeal in the inquiry. So that process has taken place for this application, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next was Councillor Clark with a supplementary.
It was, yeah. And I'm sort of pulling back slightly. On page 7, 3.4, it says Strensall Common option. It's a clarification, a point of clarification, really, actually. It says Strensall Common options to mitigate impacts of increased river pressure will need to be explored. So that is done in the reserved matter stage of the application. Is that correct? On the
It's a similar answer. The comments from the ecologist were made in advance of the inquiry decision for the site to the north, which is very clear on how the Secretary of State assessed the impacts for the site to the north and how they were satisfied. And it would be the same process and same outcome for this particular site.
I'm not sure that answers my question, because it's about where does that get where do those mitigations take place, at what stage? This application, or
that's
in the
reserve
matter
stage?
Yeah, that's my question. Thank you.
Layout and landscaping. So yeah, That's where we do that.
Okay, and councillor Eyre also supplementary.
Yeah, I actually read the Secretary of State decision in quite some detail. I've got a copy of it here, and I don't see reflected in that what's being reflected from officers. I mean, one of the things that the Secretary of State did specifically state was the cumulative impact on Strensall Common of numerous developments. So it's not a correct interpretation from that to say, well, actually, he was happy with that one, so he's happy with this one. That's not what he said. He said there's a cumulative impact from all of the developments in the area that puts pressure and requires very detailed individual assessment. And that could only be done through a very, very detailed mitigation plan. And that mitigation plan is around, and I think I'm sick of what Councillor Melly was asking, around dog walking. Because I also read the report that went on to why the Strensall Barracks was stopped from being developed. And it was all about the impact on soil of urine and feces from dogs. So the mitigation has to specifically be not about open space, and it's not about that. It's saying, yes, people can actually walk and can do things. It's about, is there enough space for people there with dogs to walk their dogs on the site, or will they choose to go somewhere else? I mean, I did cross-country running from Huntington School at Strensall Common, so it's quite a common route for people in the Huntington area to go there for extended walks. And I can't see anywhere on this site development that has mitigation for somebody wanting to walk a dog. And you can't say that it's okay because, which it says for the other open space, that, well, they can use the site above, which is equally problematic. But the planning inspector and the Secretary of State have just about said, on balance, there's possibly enough mitigation north of the site for that site itself. There's nothing I can see. So where is the mitigation on this plan that we're looking at that protects the Strensall Common site on dog walkers?
So in terms, well, if I go through, so this is the Secretary of State's decision from the site to the north. You're correct, there's only what we're showing at the moment. So there's not, the preference for Strensall Common is multiple kilometres of distance for someone to walk a dog. So it would never be possible to do unless you had a site that was explicitly big enough. So for the site to the north, they said, in addition to the proposed facilities on the appeal site, open space is also available at existing public open space at Monk's Stray. The use of another alternative site at Monk's Cross proposed as part of another residential development. These will contribute to mitigating any impacts on the Strensall Common SAC arising from the appeal site. So they were happy that for the site to the north, what was proposed on that site and what is already existing in the locality was adequate in terms of mitigation. They went on to talk about the common being about 4 kilometres away from the appeal site as the crow flies, but only accessible by car. The travel distance to this is much longer and has limited car parking capacity. The Secretary of State does not consider it is likely that residents from the appeal site would choose to drive to Strensall Common to exercise their dogs when a range of much closer alternative open space sites are available within walking distance. So on the back of that, we don't find how this site could be found to have any adverse impact.
But the bullet point after that, which you haven't read, goes on to say that it concludes with the proposed mitigation measures. It's not, as I said, that's that site with the proposed mitigation measures. So this site would have to be treated the same and would have to have, quote, with the proposed mitigation measures for this site as well. So it's not just a 4 kilometre bit. It was a case of, yeah, it didn't say all of those things. But it goes on to say, with the proposed mitigations, the proposal will not result in adverse effects on the integrity of the common.
I mean, yeah, we do have to look at everyone cumulatively. So you're right in what you're saying. We're looking at all the new developments and the extra pressure. But I think when we looked at that appeal decision, we felt it was clear enough that based on what that site was providing, which was quite a large walking route around the periphery of that site, which this site in turn would have access to, and all the closer facilities, we arrived at the same conclusion as the Secretary of State did on that other appeal site.
I think we probably have to take it as being that that's the officer judgment. We then take a balanced opinion, and when we get to debate, we can argue the whys and wherefores on that. So I'm going to move us on. I did have Councillor Fisher. I had you next as the substantive question, but I think that was your question that you asked. In which case, next on my list was Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just on the proposed additional conditions, the accommodation mix. And obviously very mindful that we're always told conditions must be necessary, reasonable and enforceable. I didn't really understand why we'd gone as far as we had. I didn't really understand why we hadn't gone less far or further, because the condition is that no more than 10 dwellings can contain more than 3 bedrooms. In other words, we're perfectly happy with 10 houses of 4, 5, 6 bedrooms and 97 houses of 3 bedrooms. And that to me seemed very strange, because obviously you can see on the blue and red differing numbers and orange of bedrooms that we've got. And so I wasn't sure why we wouldn't condition it more, that we'd have 10 of no more than 3 bedrooms and an amount of 3 and amounts of 2.
I think it's something we'd look at when we got the reserved matters in, and we would raise issue. You're right. If they were all 3 beds, I think we'd say no, that's not an appropriate mix. But we've not the housing needs assessment and the neighbourhood plan policies say something's subtly different in terms of the housing needs. So we haven't got an explicit percentage or number that we could use, and it is an outline, but we just felt that referring only to the number of 4-bed houses was more aligned with that neighbourhood plan and the local plan as a line in the sand, if you like. But there is some flex between what we would accept in terms of 1, 2 and 3 beds, and there is flexibility, so it would probably be unreasonable for us to be precise in setting those numbers out. They are indicatively shown on the plan further to that, though.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe it's one for Sandra, because in my view, that's just not a reasonable assessment, that once we're going down this route of the minimum levels, that we're only doing it for one particular type of housing. And obviously we can say it'll be looked at detailed reserved matters, but by that point the ship has sailed. If we're only conditioning one thing at reserved matters, we're only conditioning one thing at reserved matters, and the site could perfectly legitimately come back with 97 3-bedroom houses and 10 6-bedroom houses, or whatever it may be, and we've approved that outline. So I don't see where we'd be able to possibly go apart from saying to the developer at reserved matters, well, we'd rather it wasn't this mix, but we'd have nowhere at all to go.
I'll obviously invite officers to answer, but I think possibly where you're pushing at, paragraph 5.27, which talks about the Huntington neighbourhood plan, particularly supporting smaller houses and 1 and 2 bedroom houses particularly, would possibly be where you would go on a reserved matters application, because that would be something that pre-existed, that would give you the leverage or the tool to stipulate what your preferred mix would be. But I'll invite officers or others to say different.
I'm gonna come in. So this is an outline application, sets the principle of development. The reserve matters are very precise, specific. Elements of the scheme, I would say the number of bedrooms within each dwelling is a principal issue rather than something that could be negotiated at layout stage. So if anything, the condition perhaps doesn't go quite far enough if members are concerned about as we were concerned about having some fix on the size of dwellings. So if members come to the point of approving the scheme, I think I'd ask for that particular condition to be something which is further delegated to officers to consider, because I it's not black and white, but I think if a developer wanted to run an argument that you didn't fix this at outline and we want to provide 97 3-bedroom houses, then that's a point of argument that I'm not 100% sure that we'd be able to head off. Yeah, we could presume in terms of something that's in accordance with the so there could be a condition where there's a condition there, the accommodation schedule is approved, rather than a condition saying 3 2-beds, 4 5 beds, 8 5 beds, whatever. So we approve an accommodation schedule through that condition. Yeah.
Okay, and Councillor Widdowson, I think you have supplementary on that.
It was more a comment just building on what you said, Councillor Crawshaw. If you're going to use the Huntington neighbourhood plan to work out the number and the type of houses, do I remember correctly that the Huntington neighbourhood plan doesn't support this development?
I think the Huntington Parish Council has objected. I'm
Okay.
not sure. I think
Sorry.
the neighbourhood plan is referred to various points through this report.
So the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan supports development proposals that deliver smaller homes suitable for young families or young people, as well as older people, to meet an identified housing need will be particularly supported. That's what the neighbourhood plan says.
Okay, I had Councillor Clark next. I think.
No, I think that might be from previous.
Was that okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
In which case, Councillor Maroney.
Thank you, Chair. If I could refer the officers to pages 25 to 27, and notwithstanding the work that's ongoing with the community infrastructure levy charging schedule, apologies, having to read that out. Could you talk me through the thinking whereby education and health have being treated quite differently in expected contributions? Thank you.
We've taken a planning judgment, in terms of, so we've sought a contribution, partial contribution towards the education. And we haven't gone with the contribution towards the NHS. There's alternative funding for both. We do have, I think that the difference is with education, it's something, we have a more robust internal evidence base that looks at education needs. Whereas in terms of the NHS asks, we're wholly dependent on what the NHS comes to with us in terms of evidence. So I think that's why we picked, if you like, the education partial one over the NHS, because that's based on a more thorough evidence base that we have locally in-house at the council that we can rely on.
Okay. Councillor Burton, was that a supplementary on this, or right? In which case, I'll put you onto my list, and I had Councillor Melly next. Sorry, was that supplementary, Councillor Eyre, or? I'm not inviting you to find a supplementary question per se. I'm just trying to be fair in terms of.
It was specifically about why there was nothing for secondary schools. I was just intrigued. The SEND thing is welcome as a new thing. I've not seen that in the planning application before, but I was confused as to why there was a requirement for primary but not a requirement for secondary places.
Yeah, so in 3.9, we've set out what education have asked for in their consultation response, and they've focused and asked for the early years and the SEND places. Their ask didn't include primary and secondary in this particular instance.
Okay, councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. If we're minded to approve this, we've got some draft conditions. Do those conditions, like maybe condition 3, would they be conditioning the precise layout of and location of the bus stop and the cycle path, or would that be subject to future agreement?
So one of the conditions, can't remember which one it is, asks for those to secure those as off-site works, but as an example for if permission goes ahead and the works in the highway go ahead, all those, the cycle track and the bus stop would be within areas that would be adopted highway, so that the final and detailed design of those elements would go through the detailed highways approval process, and they go through the full road safety audit process. So it may well be that as a consequence of that detailed approval process, things might change slightly. The point made about the bus stop, for example, a safety audit might come up and require that an amendment to that particular design.
Thank you. Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at. I don't want the developer to be committed to a floating bus stop if it's possible to redesign that at all.
So that, yeah, the condition allows for the highways officers and experts in the road safety audit to adjust that if they see it fit.
Okay, councillor Ben Burton.
Thanks. Hoping this isn't going to be too complicated. I'm trying to work out what I can consider, well, what we're being asked to consider in terms of, so a lot of the application relies on the fact it's 100% affordable housing, but the type of affordable housing is indicative at the moment. I guess the question is, what is the approach and like safeguard that the council has for determining what type of affordable housing comes forward in the future? But the other part is, are we actually considering that, or does the local plan consider all affordable housing in that number of affordable houses we need equal, I guess is the question. But sorry, this is quite a technical question to pop up in the middle of an application, so I apologise in advance.
So all the usual safeguards for affordable housing would be resolved in detail through the legal agreement. So we'd have a raft of requirements in there to make sure that the affordable housing met the MPPF definitions, and it would secure its in perpetuity, etc., in the similar manner that we do with regular schemes where we only secure a portion of affordable housing.
Yeah, sorry, I guess my point was 80 shared ownership properties, does that have the same weight as 80 social rent properties, I guess is the question.
Well, I guess that in terms of, we know from the housing needs assessments and how we normally approach affordable housing that our overriding need is for the social rent. So as a standard, when we're dealing with affordable housing, we try and secure the split of 80% being social rent and 20 of the discount sale and the other typologies. So the social rent is of a higher need locally, and that's evidenced in the needs assessment.
Supplementary. A supplementary, please, Chair. On page 29, there's a summary of the Section 106 planning obligations, and in that it says at least 26 of the homes are to be social rent. So is it a number that would be secured as social rent rather than a percentage? If because this application is for up to 107 homes. If there's actually fewer than that number of homes, would we still get 26 social rent, or would that actually be a percentage and we could potentially have fewer? Like, is it 26 homes or is it 24% of the homes?
Just say again which paragraph that's.
In the Section 106 / planning obligations, about halfway down, page 29.
Page 29.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a 26 of the homes, there's no percentage there, so at least 26 would be social rent. That's what we've recommended as a head of term in the planning obligations. And then that's that first bullet point, that all of the homes are to meet the MPPF definition of affordable housing.
Sorry, supplementary, yeah.
Yeah, councillor Ben Burton.
Sorry, thanks. And just to check, the stuff we'd have control over as a developed planning authority would be the 30% affordable that's required by policy, but we wouldn't have any dictation over the remaining 70% in terms of what type of affordable housing that is, because it's beyond the policy level. So they could bring forward whatever they wanted of that type. Is that right?
No, I don't agree with that. I think because in the planning balance, the fact that it's 100% affordable housing weighs heavily in our recommendation, and I think everything that goes along with that is similarly ratcheted up, I would say.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. Now, that's very interesting that you said that that is the principal reason. Now, I'd like you to refer you to a previous planning application, 20-00752 FULM, which was a Trenchard Road off Borough Bridge Road, which was brought to this committee in on the 3rd of December 2020. This was a very similar scheme for 60 affordable houses, and it was refused by the committee. It then went to appeal, and the appeal was dismissed, and the inspector concluded that the supply of 100% affordable housing was not sufficient to overrule the harm to the greenbelt. And I was on the committee at the time, and the harm to the greenbelt there was probably less than it is here, because that particular site related better to housing, the former military housing just opposite the Civil Service Sports Ground, rather better than this does, which is much more isolated. Can you tell me, please, why is this site being recommended for approval when there is a clear officer decision on an almost equivalent site, which dismissed an appeal? Oh, and sorry, can I just also say the housing need now is quoted as 4.21 years. That's a supply of land. When there it was somewhere between, I have the figures here, 2.79 and 3.45 years. So we're considerably better off now in terms of housing supply than we were when that appeal was dismissed.
So in terms of, well, it's a matter of judgment, but our assessment is that this particular site has that limited greenbelt purposes. So in our assessment, we found that the greenbelt, the site where the appeal at Trenchard Road, we felt that performed more of the greenbelt purposes than this one, and we argued that very strongly at the inquiry. We've concluded that this one performs limited in terms of the greenbelt. The policy, the other element is the policies have shifted. We've talked in 4.22, I think, about SS1 and how that conversation we had earlier about how we're expected to meet affordable housing need, and the plan acknowledges now that it looks to meet 35% and it's trying to meet 45, but it can't do that without windfall sites. So that's quite a strong change in the way the local plan policy is written. Since then, there's in terms of housing need, there's the housing supply and there's the housing delivery. So if we're going to meet that 45%, there's an annual target that we should have been hitting as a minimum since submission of the plan 2017 and 2018. And we've fallen below that target for 7 years up to now. And we're at a point where we will need windfalls to meet the need. So it's accumulation of those limited greenbelt purposes and the need where we are at the moment. That's why we've found the very special circumstances in this particular case. I think it'll probably be rare that we'll have similar arguments, and similar to Trenchard Road, we normally, if we found that a site performed well in terms of the greenbelt, we'd probably be recommending refusal again, as we did at Trenchard Road.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you. But would you not concede that part of the reason that we've fallen behind the delivery of affordable housing is the fact that the local plan has not yet come to fruition, has not yet been adopted? Because as soon as it does get adopted, presumably there'll be a flood of applications that will provide a significant amount of affordable housing.
Some of our inquiry documents do take that position, but we've also brought a lot of site allocations and strategic sites to committee already. the civil service site probably been an example that was approved a year or two before the Trenchard Road one. So we have brought a lot of the strategic sites, including Monk's Cross, to the committee already. So that's a finely balanced one.
Okay, I'm looking for any further questions. Wow, it was a sort of a rhetorical, really, but Councillor Melly and then Councillor Aaron, and what I would like to do is move us towards a brief adjournment. But Councillor Melly first.
Thank you. I've just got some questions about Section 106 planning obligations, because there's various officers and departments that have requested Section 106 obligations, and some of them, like some of the education contributions and primary healthcare contributions, it's been explained that they're not required because of the affordable housing nature. But there were some things like some of the transport contributions, which I couldn't see included in the Section 106. And I was wondering, I'm pretty sure in other applications for sites with 100% affordable housing, we've added a condition about the council being able to nominate to a certain percentage. If we felt that was necessary and we wanted to do that, would that be a reserved matter, or would it be part of Section 106, or would it be a condition on this? I think maybe for like an application New Year's Week or something, we added a condition about council nominations to.
Nomination rights are normally within the Section 106 agreements.
Okay.
How many of the properties we have nominations over is normally. There was an issue there, the Garthway site, in terms of the proportion of nominations. We asked for a higher proportion. Similar issue here. There was 100% affordable sites, and we uplifted the normal level of nominations above the 20% level that we would had if it was standard policy requirement. So yeah, that should be covered in the Section 106. But yeah, we could seek higher levels of nomination rights above the level that we would have done if we were securing 30% on this site rather than 100%.
And there was a few requests for transport contributions in Section 106, and only one of them has been carried across to this summary of the planning obligations.
Yeah, we've asked for the car club contribution, which is consistent with the appeal decision to the north, where the inspector agreed with us that was a reasonable ask. We don't always ask for all the highways requests because we don't always feel that they're reasonable and necessary, and that's some of the ones that they've asked for here. We've not felt that they're reasonable or necessary, so we've not requested them. We've just been consistent with the site to north, which was allowed appeal.
Because so the request from highways was £200 per dwelling for car club contributions, and that's only a very, very small portion. You know, they've also requested £600 per dwelling for travel plan contributions and £400 per dwelling for sustainable travel incentives. £200 per dwelling is a very, very, very small portion of what's requested.
Well,
and when you add that to the fact that there was education contribution requested, which isn't being fully met, and health contribution, which isn't being met at all, it's quite a lot of Section 106 contributions that have been requested and then aren't there in the Section 106.
In terms of the travel planning, the developer has their own travel planner that undertakes a travel plan, which in national guidance tends to be sufficient. That's as far as you go. That the developer does a travel plan. They do it for 5 years or they do it for longer if they're not meeting your targets, and we feel that's sufficient. We don't have any specific policies or guidance that says that everyone who builds a house has to give people money towards cycle equipment. There are other ways and means of people having cycle equipment. So we don't think it's necessary. That's officer's opinion. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. The bad news is I was indicating for a while, so I've actually got 4.5 questions, but I believe they're all relatively quick ones. So the first one was regarding the appeal to the land of the north. When the Secretary of State agreed that one, when I read through it, it said because there was a statutory objection from National England, there had to be a condition added that gave National England the legal right to respond to the approval. I don't see such a condition here, and that was also outlined, so I assume that such a condition should exist. It gives them 21 days or whatever to. Okay. I'm happy if you want to come back to that after the adjournment.
I don't know if I'm answering the question. So when after the inquiry for the site to the north, and the inspector made their recommendation to the Secretary of State, there was quite a lot of to-ing and fro-ing and exchange of correspondence between the inspector and Natural England in terms of consultation and details on the HRA that was mentioned earlier. So there was a lot of correspondence on that, and Natural England were consulted on the HRA and the proposed mitigation, and that progressed towards the final decision from the Secretary of State. So I don't know.
It might be worth looking at, John. I think it specifically says the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 that because he's granted planning permission against Natural England, that there has to be you have to include a specific condition to allow them to take legal advice on how to respond. If you intended to give consent for development, that would it's. But I'm happy for that. The second one was this is a really easy one. On the list of consultations, you put affordable homes. I'm not aware that brick buildings can reply to consultations. So, who exactly was consulted? Page 7 for the first of the consultation said affordable housing.
Affordable housing. So that's our affordable housing officer.
Right. Thought that would be quick. Third one is the reference that Councillor Fisher made to the 4.2. Once the local plan is adopted, which could be next month, I'm hearing lots of rumours, that 5-year land supply is present. So would your opinion have been different had the 5-year land supply having been met?
No, we're still finding the very special circumstances on the benefits of the affordable housing. It's not that we wouldn't be making a different recommendation if the local plan was adopted today, I think is what you're asking.
If we did have the evidence to demonstrate a 5-year land supply, which we will do once it's adopted, would that have changed the decision?
Not fundamentally, no, because it's still that challenge towards meeting the target to meet 45% of our affordable housing need that we're basing the very special circumstances on, not just 5-year supply.
But the 45% is over the life of the plan, so it's a point to monitor the plan over. But I'll discuss that one later on. The last one was around windfalls. Am I correct in believing actually the local plan does not include a requirement for windfall sites in the first 3 years of the plan, and equally that most of those sites should be under 0.2 hectares?
Don't know that one.
The answer is yes.
Okay. I'm not seeing further hands for indication of any questions at this point. So what I'm going to propose that we do is it's just coming up to 6 o'clock. If we can take a short adjournment, come back at 6:05, and we can then move on into debate at that point. If I can just remind members of the public present, please don't seek to speak to any of the members of the committee, and members of the committee, please don't discuss anything to do with the application during the adjournment. We'll be back in about 5 minutes or so. Back to this evening's committee, planning A committee meeting. We are partway through the determination of the application for land to the south and east of the cemetery, New Lane, Huntington. So we are now moving into the debate part of the hearing. So I will invite members to give any thoughts or things that they're taking into consideration. Not at this moment looking for a proposal on how to deal with the officer recommendation, but you can certainly indicate the way in which you're thinking. And I will just remind everybody that if somebody has just spoken and made lots and lots of brilliant points that you absolutely agree with, you could just say, I agree with them. You don't need to repeat them all. So I will invite show of hands. Councillor Widdowson, that's you first.
Can I just ask a general question? The term affordable keeps being used. What value is affordable in this particular context?
So we refer to affordable housing in terms of the NPPF, which has a whole A4 page, so I don't plan to read it out. But it's affordable housing for rent, starter homes under the definition of the Housing and Planning Act, discounted market sales housing that's sold at a discount of at least 20% below local market value. And then there's other affordable routes to home ownership.
I can stop. Yeah, that's fine. In terms of what does that mean? Is that 150,000? Is that 350,000? Is that what does that mean in this particular context?
I think perhaps the simple way for me to answer it rather than the officers to answer it is I think you're drawing a distinction between what do we as lay people think of as affordable, and that depends on what your salary is and what your other housing costs are and all the rest of it, and what is the legal definition in planning terms of affordable housing. And the definition as described by Gareth is a number of different things, including 20% discount on the market value. So in one area, it's 20% of whatever the average price is in that area. In another area, the average house price may be higher or lower, but it's 20% of that. You can then have discounted rent, which is a percentage of that. And then there are a number of other mixes of tenure. And so this application, as we heard, is talking about a percentage of social rent and a percentage of affordable rent and a percentage of discounted sale or shared ownership, I think it is, rather than discounted sale on this application. But I don't think we are here to make a judgment on what we think is affordable for York. This is a legal definition within the NPPF of what affordable is.
And then social rent is more affordable than the NPPF definition of that 20% discount, which is something that we negotiate into schemes.
That's right.
Yeah, I think so. That just plays into my thinking. How does that feed into the financial viability assessment? So we're being told that there is not enough margin in this development to provide education, to provide health, to provide all the things that are there. So that must be based on something, because like you said, 100% social rent will give you an entirely different financial viability assessment to 75% being sold at 20% less than market. If you're getting to 20% less than market, I suspect you could probably then start to afford schools places and health places. So there must be something locked in, otherwise we can't have a fixed financial viability assessment for them to prove that they can't afford those Section 106s.
Yeah, we did. The viability assessment we received from the applicant, from memory, I think was on the basis of a 50-50 split between discounted rent and sale. So that, yeah, there could be different permutations that would come out, but it's complicated now to understand because it is either way the landowner retains the property over time, so the viability is looked at a different way. So that was one of the scenarios, but the land value, etc., it came out as way below being able to provide any contributions whatsoever. So what we've got has come from negotiation with the developer. The viability appraisal doesn't say it can contribute anything substantially.
So on the last application we had a dynamic condition that basically said we will constantly review that position, and if it turns out you made 10 million quid more than you've told us at that point, we will trigger higher section 106 agreements. That hasn't happened here.
So when we've looked at the other schemes, for example, being a new Ayswick, that the viability work took over a year, I think, and it looked at all the different permutations, and that's what we see generally when it's a development that provides affordable housing 100%, regardless of the mix. It cannot afford to provide any planning obligations.
I think we have to take the view, and because this is contained within the report as well. If the committee feels that the planning balance overall is not appropriate, or is, you know, leans you one way or the other way, then you know that is something you can take into account as a consideration in your assessment. But I think from what I see, officers have taken the standard approach, and there hasn't been a dispute over viability, and the fact that it's 100% affordable is impacted on the asks and requests in terms of 106 and otherwise. So that then is a material planning consideration for us. Councillor Fisher.
I suppose somebody's got to kick off with an appraisal.
Just before you do, because I launched into saying we're going to go into debate, and I forgot that I had asked Gareth just to give us a brief update on something that was discussed immediately before we went to the adjournment. So if I can just allow Gareth to do that, and then I will come straight to you.
I've got a couple of things. Firstly, Councillor Melly's question about the width of this two-way cycleway, which is shared as a footpath. 3 meters is acceptable under LTM 120 in this type of location. Second point, Councillor Eyre referred to some text in the local plan that referred to the size of windfall sites, and I think bringing forward windfall sites in the first 3 years of the plan. The text in the local plan as it stands at the moment has been struck out, so that doesn't form part of the explanation. It was never part of the policy, it was part of the explanation to the policy, but that doesn't form part of the local plan as it stands at the moment. Jonathan has an answer to the Natural England question on the land.
Yes, so for their response on this planning application was it finishes that if we're minded to approve the application, then there's a requirement under section 28 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act to notify Natural England of the permission and its terms, i.e. the conditions, and we're required to allow them a further period of 21 days before the operation can commence. So that would explain and be aligned why there was a condition on the other side that said development can't commence for 21 days to allow that 21-day process to happen under the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So that would, I think we would add an extra condition in the same way that there was a condition on the site to the north to that effect, to allow for that 21 days. And we would obviously notify Natural England in line with their request.
Okay, I will kick us off, invite Councillor Fisher to kick us off into the debate.
Thank you very much indeed. There are many things to be pleased about this development. There are good points to it. It's 100% affordable. Clearly we need affordable housing. There's no doubt about that. I like the fact that it's using air sourced heat pumps, so it's going to be relatively low carbon, and it is a fairly accessible site. We now come to the bad bits. One is the cumulative effect on Huntington. Huntington is already, in my view, very close to the limit of what it can take. I mean, we've got 970 new houses coming on the Monks Cross Link Road. They're in the local plan. I voted for those, perfectly happy with those. 300 just north of here, which were approved by the Secretary of State against the wishes of this council. There are also another 113 in New Earswick. I think it's 113 on the former Joseph Rowntree playing fields, and now another 107 on New Lane. It is virtually impossible, and I'm with the surgery in Huntington, it's almost impossible to get a doctor's appointment there. The facilities are at a limit, and I'm afraid that is not a good thing. I'm also concerned by this consideration of this as a windfall site. For me, a windfall site should be a site that was not expected to be produced because it was used for some other purpose and is now being abandoned for that purpose and is suddenly available for housing. That's what I see as a windfall site. And certainly, you know, if it was, say, an industrial site that had been used for something else and now was abandoned and could be used for housing, great, that's fine. What worries me is that if we take this as a windfall site, does any greenbelt site get automatic approval for if it offers 100% affordable housing? Because this site does serve, and it's acknowledged in the report, a greenbelt purpose. But my main thing is the main objection to it is the mitigation for Strensall Common. With respect to the Secretary of State, he hasn't got a clue about what mitigation is. This mitigation is great if you just want to take your dog out for a short walk, let it have a wee, do its business, that's fine. But Strensall Common is not that kind of dog walking area. People come from all over the area to walk on Strensall Common because it is vast. It's 3 square miles. You can walk for 2 hours on there without seeing, you know, without going off it. I've met some people from all over York. I even met a certain councillor, Callum Taylor, on there one day walking his dog. You know, people come from all over. It's a destination site for dog walking, and people don't go there to walk the dogs just. They go there for a walk and take the dogs with them. Now, that causes a real problem for the habitat because Strensall Common is such a sensitive site. It has to be kept low because of the risk of wildfires. It's a lowland, wet, dry heath, so it has to be grazed by sheep. There are about 550 sheep on that common provided by a farmer who is paid to graze it. And they have to keep the common short. And we've had a number of instances of dogs worrying sheep. The farmer has already told me he's considering taking his sheep off there, or he's told other people I know who've informed me he's thinking of taking his sheep off there, which would be catastrophic for it. This is not mitigation of what is required to mitigate the use of Strensall Common. And it's not just that, there's also the dog, it was recognised in the local plan. The dog feces are commonly left, and they shouldn't be because the military training area is used for soldiers, so it should be picked up, but people don't do it. I often go on there and pick up bags of dog poo and put them in the bin 10 yards away. The urine causes a problem because of the soils type. It is dying the death of 1,000 cuts, and it is an internationally important site. I'm sorry, on balance, I would love to approve this application, but I think it's in the wrong place. And I don't think I can support it. If it had been somewhere on a less sensitive greenbelt site, you know, the Trenchard Road one, in my view, was close enough to the other housing to be okay. This one is detached. It has no link to any other housing. So I just think it's the wrong site and I can't support it.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to invite Gareth, because he waved it in front of me. We've actually got the MPPF definition of windfall sites, and I think we just need to be clear on what the definition is in the MPPF.
So in the MPPF, a windfall site is simply sites not specifically identified in the development plan. That's as far as it goes.
Okay. So next on my list, I had Councillor Ben Burton.
Thank you, Chair. First one was just before kind of my view was if we are to take this forward to an officer recommendation, we spoke previously about approval for the accommodation schedule as a condition. And I think I'd like to see that on there personally. I don't know if we need to ask it to the committee, but I'd like to see that as an option to be taken forward because I think it's helpful in terms of making sure we've got the powers to control that in future. Otherwise, yeah, there are lots of concerns. I think the reality of this one is that I think the officers are right in their assessment of this in terms of its impact on the green belt. Realistically, sites like this, we should have been way ahead of the time and seen that they were always going to be seen as not really core aligning with the green belt and put them into a local plan so we had more control over what kind of open space allowance you'd get, bigger strategic master planning for those kind of developments so that you would get the things out of them. But we aren't in that position and we need affordable housing, and I don't see any. I'm personally happy to support it with the changes to the conditions, would be my view.
Okay, I'm looking for further hands. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I was to have lived on New Lane 25 years ago, I'd have looked out on the fields and thought, well, I'm not going to see any development here. And if I lived on New Lane 12.5 years ago, I'd have seen Monk's Cross and everything like that. And I thought, well, it's not inconceivable that gap in between us and Monk's Cross may be filled in. I wouldn't like it, but it's not inconceivable. But then for me, things have gone a different route. We've had a local plan. There's a neighbourhood plan in Huntington, and it's not an allocated site. What is clear in the neighbourhood plan in Huntington is they don't want this site. And we've listened to certain relatively minor matters about the Huntington neighbourhood plan views on things, but we haven't about whether it's an appropriate site. And it is green belt, in my opinion. And although the council seems to be watering down the definition of green belt in most places, and we say it doesn't meet this and doesn't meet that, you know, I do think it's a green belt site, and I think everything that applies to why this site is potentially being okayed could apply to all sorts of areas in York. Not least, fundamentally, we might as well just build all the way up to the ring road and then see where we go after that point. And then from that, when it is proposed for development, so I lost my train of thought. Sorry, yeah. And then obviously we get the whole various parts don't stack up. However, the magical word affordable housing, and obviously it's always viewed as this sort of binary thing of things are affordable or not. Well, every house is bought by somebody, so it is affordable. So I don't like the term, although obviously we need to get more lower cost houses and lower social rent houses. But I don't see that as a get out for all of the obligations. We had an application a few months ago where, you know, they just struck a line through I think all of the education contribution, which seemed to me crazy. Here they're just not proposing to pay what they should. Obviously touched on earlier, if we're going to go into the whole social mix of houses and bedrooms, why are we going in such limited detail? So for me, it's just the point that I don't see why, if this site has a supposed windfall, and as Gareth just said, the definition is very light, but I don't think people working on the local plan would have thought green fields would be windfall sites. I just don't really see which parts of York wouldn't be built on the minute a developer says it's affordable. And as it's affordable, I want to be let off that, and I want to be let off that. I don't really want to pay that. And then once we've got an outline planning approval, if we have got it, you know, all these people think about this will follow at reserved matters. Well, it will follow at reserved matters in exactly the way the developer wants it to follow, because the principles will all be there outlined.
Okay, thank you. Next, I had Councillor Fenton.
Thanks, Chair. I was thinking about the question I asked to the public speaker earlier around resident engagement. I was thinking about a site in my ward, which is not too dissimilar to this, where the potential developers have been really quite proactive in terms of running drop-ins, doing leaflet drops to engage with residents. I think recognising the challenge of seeking to develop a site that isn't in the local plan, isn't identified for development. I think it's disappointing that the developers don't appear to have engaged in that way. Maybe it was a case of seeing the neighbourhood plan and in effect seeing that as a sort of a barrier to at least having those conversations. But I think in part that's kind of fed into some of the concerns around this being sort of overdevelopment in the context of sites that have already been identified for development in the ward. And I think that was potentially a missed opportunity. And I agree with Councillor sort of Fisher that if you were to look at this site in isolation, it has lots of positives, not least the provision of affordable housing, the link to transport networks, to retail. There's a lot of good things going for it, but I think in terms of the context of its proximity to two very large development sites, and the almost complete lack of contribution towards health and a scaled back contribution towards education, I think there are concerns around the cumulative impact. If there was more evidence of the developers kind of engaging with local residents, councillors in terms of addressing some of those concerns. I would have that would allay some of my concerns, but it's it's a difficult balance, and that's obviously what we need to bear in mind. But it's just disappointing that more hasn't been done to address some of those concerns around the cumulative impact of this development were it to go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Next was Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. I must admit, having read this report, I was quite surprised that it was recommended for approval. It's one of those things we decided when we get to that stage of the local plan, we wouldn't be in situations like this. I think it is a little bit frustrating. I mean, we have a local plan for a reason, and I've spent best part of 15, 17 years of my life developing that particular local plan. And part of that local plan is defining what is greenbelt land and setting finally for this city a permanent greenbelt, a permanent and sustainable greenbelt. The approach that seems to be taken here and being discussed is that basically it isn't a green belt, it's actually just an affordable housing belt. And not even affordable housing, actually, a 20% less than market value housing belt. So any of the green belt land around the city not allocated for housing is de facto allocated for an affordable housing belt to be built, any housing to be built and sold for 20% less than market value. I appreciate the challenge we have in terms of delivering, and that I think the 20 to 30% was around about the affordable housing target in the local plan. During that investigation process, the inspector did push at that. As a result of that, you're right, we did then get that increased uplift to a target of 40 to 45% affordable homes. But that's for the lifetime of the plan. That was never meant to be a sort of an ad hoc process. It was part of the review points of the plan that after 5 years of the plan, you look at the affordable housing delivery and say, how are we doing against our affordable housing need? Okay, that's not right. And that's what gives you the powers later on in that local plan to say, you know what, we can push to review the local plan. It gives you the tools to say, we can actually ask for 30, 40% on more sites because we're not delivering. It really strengthens it. But it's supposed to be part of that review point process and part of the levers that sit in to a 15 to 25 year plan to allow you to manage that. And then I come back to what is the point of us having a local plan? It may have seemed to many people to have just been a talking shop for the last 15, 17 years, well, 50 odd years, for everyone to have a fantastic discussion, but it isn't. It's about setting a vision for strategic development of the city. That is why we have it. We have put acres and acres of work into looking and evaluating these sites. And I take the point Councillor Burton said about why wasn't this in here. It wasn't in here because it was analysed, it was put forward for housing, was analysed, assessed against Greenbelt criteria, and decided that it served a purpose, a fundamental purpose as Greenbelt, upheld by the planning inspector, ironically, and also by the Secretary of State and the second planning inspector that looked at the thing, all of which said this serves a fundamental and needed purpose as part of the Greenbelt. In terms of the windfall issue, I take on board officers' points around that. I think that's a very loosely worded thing. The windfall site is something that you could never envisage. This was actually, as I said, you said it's something that wasn't identified in the plan. This site was identified in the plan and rejected in the plan. We did have a windfall site on Coney Street the other day. That is definitely a windfall site. That's what was meant around those sort of things. There is a question for us as a council, as all of us as councillors as well. Do we want to be a city of strategic growth, or do we just want to be an ad hoc committee that sets the future of the city for 25 years on a whim? This has the potential, if we do take that approach, in fact, even to begin to stall development in a city, because we have a limited capacity for house building, we have a limited capacity for all of that. Strategic sites that we're delivering are the most important sites for this city that will deliver the vast majority of homes for the next 15 to 25 years. They will deliver the vast majority of affordable homes. They will deliver the schools. They will deliver the health facilities. They will deliver the shopping facilities. Why would anybody go ahead with progressing some of those strategic sites when they realise that they can actually double, treble the amount of houses and profit that they can make by getting onto these greenbelt sites first? So they'll look at that and go, we've already got planning permission for all of these sites. The one at Huntington, for example, let's not progress that. We've got planning permission for that. Let's get all greenfields, get those in. And we know land banking happens. It's a significant problem. One of the biggest issues we have around here is land banking. So what we should be doing is getting that process in place, and us as a council and committee saying, you get on and deliver strategic sites. Stop sitting on that land, get on building those sites, stop coming to us and asking, well, can we have a bit more land and a bit more land and a bit more land? There is no infrastructure planning about doing it this way. We don't get any of the infrastructure. it won't solve the affordable solution. 75% of these could be sold at 20% market value. That's 260 to 270,000 pounds a home for 75, 25 social rent. Taking Councillor Burton's point, fantastic. If it was 100% social rent, that would be a completely different proposition. But 75 of these will be sold at 262,000 and above in terms of that, which does, as I mentioned before, raise real questions about the fact that they can't afford to do any of the things around health, around schools, and around open space and sports, for example. Natural England also, statutory consultee, have opposed this. Such a significant statutory consultee that we can't even approve it without giving them 21 days notice and adding a condition in to stop any form of development going, well, to give them the opportunity to take legal advice, to take further steps to stop this. That's how significant their objection is, but it's sort of glossed over in terms of that. So I think with everything that's in the paper, with all of those issues, I really can't see any way that anyone could really support this.
Okay, thank you. Looking for any further indications of anybody else who wants to contribute to the debate? Not seeing Councillor Melly.
Land being allocated as green belt doesn't mean that it cannot be developed as a hard and fast rule. It just means you have to give weight to the purposes that that green belt allocation serves. I think there's 5 green belt purposes, and this particular site, although it has been allocated as green belt, doesn't meet most of those purposes. So I think it really does come down to really special circumstances, and on a case by case basis, is it acceptable for this development to go ahead on this green belt site? I don't think it opens up the whole of the green belt to development as long as it's affordable housing. I think we just need to look at this application and whether in this case, given the green belt purposes of this site and the benefits of this development, is this acceptable development? Yeah.
Okay, Councillor Widdowson.
I'll be brief because some of it has been covered. So, positively, it's got affordable housing, it's got social housing, and if the cycle route ever does happen, it'll get a complete cycle route. They're great. But the affordable card seems to be being played as the joker in the pack or the get out of jail card. So we're going to have 107 houses, roughly 400 people, roughly, let's say, 200 children. Where are they going to go to school? How are they going to get the GP appointments? What is the transport infrastructure? And by waiving the affordable card, there is no support for any of that stuff happening. On top of that, it's not in the local plan. It's not in Huntington's neighbourhood plan. Natural England are objecting to it. There is going to be harm to Strensall Common. And I think on balance, if we approve this, I think we are giving the green light to developers to go cherry pick whichever greenfield site they wish to develop because it's cheaper and quicker to do. And they'll waive the affordable card because at that point, we can't do anything about it.
Okay, I will give you where I am then, based on all the contributions. And I think, there's a lot of positives that have been identified and there's some negatives that have been identified. I would agree with the comments that Councillor Melly made around the greenbelt purposes. The report is quite clear about the purposes that it believes are served by this section of greenbelt, and it gives an amount of weight to those purposes. It's been talked about in terms of the 106 contributions that are being made or not made, and we can determine accordingly on the weight that we want to give to those. And I think that on the one hand, it is unfortunate that there isn't a healthcare contribution. On the other hand, there's £293,000 worth of funding going into SEND provision and into early years provision, which I'm presuming is nursery places, 2 things that we desperately need in the city. In terms of the wider education requirement, we're in a funny situation in York. I don't know the specifics of this particular site and the particular schools, but generalising across the city, we are actually having a dip in the number of pupils that there are in the city, and there are schools that have spare places, and so you can't call for contributions to fund extra places if there are places available already. My guess would be that the education department has looked at what the need is, looked at where they need to ask for things, and their reasoned ask is the SEND, which we all know we desperately need more support around, and early years, which we know we need more support around. The full contribution hasn't been made, but actually 3/4 of the contribution has been made, broadly speaking. And I think that when you take that into account alongside the affordable mix, and let's just be clear, because it's been suggested that these are all going to be things that will be sold off at 20% below the market rate. Actually, the indication is that a significant proportion of them will be social housing, as you know, social rent, and some of it will be affordable rent, and then there'll be discounted sale. I think if we do think as a committee that we were minded to approve, and certainly that would be where I'm heading towards, I think looking at a condition around the accommodation schedule and the mix there is appropriate, particularly in light of, and I appreciate some of the points that have been made around the Huntington neighbourhood plan, but actually, if we say, okay, we think on balance, the green belt, we've found some special circumstances, I think it's then reasonable to say, but what does the neighbourhood plan say about when there is development? How does it look? And that actually aligns with what the housing need assessment is from the council in terms of 1, 2, 3 bed houses. Then actually, for me, when you're looking at the balance overall, it's a no-brainer. We're in a city that people cannot afford to live in, and we are desperately, desperately short of affordable housing. The report sets out that even under the terms of the local plan, we will not meet our affordable housing mix, and we will need to rely on windfall sites. Windfall sites, by definition, are not what we all might like to see in terms of reusing brownfield or anything else. They are any site at all that is not identified in the local plan that comes forward with an offer of development. And we have to take each of those windfall sites on their own merit, and we weigh them up and we decide whether or not we think it is something to support or otherwise. And for me, on this basis, taking into account the harms that are identified, the contributions that are being made, and that 100% affordable contribution with a minimum of 26 houses at social rent, and I would hope that we might be able to push that a little further, I come down on the side of saying we have to support this. Councillor Fisher and Councillor Melly.
Thank you. I would take great disagreement with the idea this site hasn't been allocated for any particular purpose. It has. It's been allocated as green belt in the local plan, and that is a purpose. It hasn't been allocated for a development purpose. It's been allocated for the purpose of remaining as green belt, and that is a purpose.
I think that's slightly twisting the wording that I used. What I'm saying is any windfall site is a site that wasn't allocated within the local plan.
But it was allocated as green belt.
Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, clearly this application, if it goes ahead, would cause harm and has harms associated with it. It may well do some harm to the site of special scientific interest, and, you know, development in the greenbelt by its very nature does harm. But I feel that there are very special circumstances and that the benefits outweigh those harms. Some of them have already been identified in terms of cycle provision, yeah, the level of affordable housing. So I'm also minded to support this. But if we were going to support it, I agree with what's been said about tenure type. Policy H2 says that development should provide for a mix of housing tenures, and there's been an indication that there will be that mix, but actually all we've got in the Section 106 planning obligations is at least 26 homes to be social rent and all the homes to be affordable according to the National Planning Policy Framework definition. And so, yes, apart from those 26, the others could all be, I guess, one single tenure. So if we were minded to approve, I would like to add something about there having to be actually a mix of tenures beyond just the 26 social rent. And also, I hear the assurance that I've been given by officers about the floating bus stop, but I was just wondering whether we could also add something that gives a kind of a stronger steer that we would like that to be looked at specifically when the details of the layout of the bus stop and the cycle path are, you know, finally agreed.
So Gareth just saying the issue around the bus stop, I think, would be picked up by an informative obviously the accommodation schedule, I think we've talked about, and presumably that would need to be conditioned.
Yes, so there was the accommodation mix condition that was tabled to members. My suggestion was that was a change to a condition requiring the approval of a scheme to approve the mix of accommodation bedroom sizes, taking into account the Huntington neighbourhood plan and the housing needs assessment. And in terms of the section 106, that would be in addition to the first bullet point of the planning obligations on page 29, to seek a mix of tenures in those remaining 81 houses.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm just going to make one further point actually, which I had jotted down while people were talking and then failed to mention, which is right back at the start of this during the public participation, and the applicant indicated that their intention was to market this to key workers in for a period of exclusivity, and taking the points that were raised at the time about not being able to necessarily reasonably condition that. I think the fact that it's been said in a public meeting on public record at least has a little bit of something. And I think when we're thinking about the lack of healthcare financial contribution, I don't think we should underestimate the number of teachers, nurses, all those types of professions that are key workers in the city who do not live in York, cannot afford to live in York. And so again, if we're doing something which will enable more of those people that we need in the city to live here, whilst we can't necessarily condition it in any way, I do take that into account in terms of the affordable provision, and again would seek to encourage any further developers really. I think that this is the sorts of thing that we need to be doing in terms of trying to retain some of those professions in the city and make York affordable for those kind of workers. Councillor Melly.
Have officers confirmed that we can't condition that?
I think when we discussed it between us, we felt that was, I think we thought it was something that we'd take away and secure as part of the negotiations for the section 106 rather than have a condition as such. That was our thoughts anyway.
Thank you. Councillor.
I think that kind of feeds into what I was going to say, and totally take on board Councillor Melly's earlier point that this is a balance between very special circumstances and the identified and significant harm to the Greenbelt. And I think that was why I asked that particular question. I think often this isn't the very special circumstances we would like there to be, that we would love there to be, this very utopian thing, which would be 100% social rent, would be identified with key workers, etc. The reality is all of that is just words. The only thing that matters actually is the very special circumstances that are in this paper, and those very special circumstances in this paper are nothing to do with key workers. They can say that, they could walk away, they could sell the site tomorrow, and it would be nothing to do with them. So any level of negotiation is in many ways pointless. All we're really getting from our indicative mix is 25 homes for social rent and 75 homes-ish at 20% less than market value. They could even potentially push that the other way and get more into that one. So that's your very special circumstances, 25-ish homes at social rent and 75-ish homes at 20% less than market value. That's not very special.
I think we can all make our judgment based on how we want to take that balance. I think we should just be clear though, the planning permission will be granted for affordable houses by the definition of the NPPF, which is a range of different things. It's been indicated that through the 106 agreements, there will be some ability to negotiate in terms of what the needs of the city are and what can be delivered. And I think the purpose of an accommodation schedule as part of the condition is to try to ensure that that mix of tenure reflects the need that there is in the city for affordable housing. So I appreciate what you're saying, but I think that the point is to try to make it as robust as it possibly can be within the legislation. But I also think, and again, I absolutely agree in terms of what we can and can't robustly, condition or otherwise. The fact that we've had a developer on public record saying that they intend to market for key workers, it's a minor point, but I do think it's an important point because it reflects the situation that we have in the city, whereby people that we desperately need to be working in the city are not able to afford to live in the city. So to that extent, it does speak to the very special circumstances for me personally, when I'm weighing between the definition in terms of the greenbelt purposes, of which the report makes clear elements of it are substantial, but elements of it are moderate weight, and you balancing that against the elements of the affordable housing. And as I say, that's a balance that we all have to make a judgment on. Councillor.
That's like a legal advice as to what weight we can give to promises made in participation section by the applicant. I'm assuming the answer is absolutely no weight whatsoever.
I would agree, next to none. But that doesn't mean to say that it doesn't give a leverage point in terms of the fact that it's on public record. But for me, that's not the thing that tips the balance for me. It's the affordable housing is what tips the balance for me. There's an additional element to it, which is the context of a city that key workers can't afford to live in. Councillor Stewart, I think you were indicating.
Yeah, just on that point, I'm very surprised at your comments about the public speaker's comments. I have nothing whatsoever to suggest that the developer is anything but the highest of standing, and when they say something, they will definitely do it. But we can't possibly give any weight to comments made in a public meeting talking about key workers in a positive way. I mean, we're talking about the smell of coffee or freshly baked bread as you go around a new house. There is nothing whatsoever tangible about that. There is nothing in the conditions. There is nothing in the plan. There is nothing whatsoever we can condition. And it's a total red herring. Now, if the developer believes, quite rightly, there's an issue for affordable housing in the city and an issue for key workers, that is something. But I can't believe we're dwelling on this as part of the development, the fact that few comments have been made about it, because there's nothing to tie it down whatsoever.
I wouldn't disagree with the majority of that, Councillor Stewart. I referred to it in passing as something that I saw as being of additional benefit over and above my judgment, which I had already outlined to you all in terms of the balance. If it wasn't being marketed for an exclusive period for key workers, I would still be saying that I feel that the balance overall tips it in favour of approval from my point of view. But I think that there is some merit in hearing a developer in a public setting saying that they recognise the need for affordable housing, that they want to retain key workers in the city. That's merely the point that I'm trying to make. But I'm not going to dwell further. We need to make a decision about whether or not we, where we want to be on it. So, rather helpfully, it's just been pointed out that actually it was on the table within the 106 negotiation that trying to retain something around key worker provision and exclusivity of marketing to key workers is something that would be possible to include within the 106 contribution, within the 106 negotiation around the tenure mix. And the way in which it's developed out as a 100% affordable housing site. So that possibly does add a little more weight in terms of the benefits of the scheme, in terms of what could or couldn't be taken into account. Sorry?
If we put it in.
If we choose to put it in.
Which is a totally different thing to a comment made saying nurses are good people, teachers are good people, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and certainly if there was a proposal to approve and having accommodation schedule and anything to go into 106, I would absolutely support making that as robust as we can. Okay, so I think unless anybody else is itching for any further debate, I'm going to look around and see if anybody wishes to make a proposal, and as usual, we would test the officer recommendation in the first instance. I saw Councillor Burton first and then Councillor Melly second.
Yeah, happy to propose, move to officer recommendation with the changes.
Okay, Councillor Melly.
Happy to second that. I would like, when we're talking about the two different numbers, so there's at least 26 which need to be social rent, and then there's all the rest. I would like it if the number of social rent could be kept at a specific number, and the rest I think doesn't need to be kept at a specific number because it's up to 107. So if a specific number is put on it, that makes it difficult.
Yeah. The recommendation at the moment is that one of the planning obligations is that at least 26 of the homes are to be social rent.
Yeah. But if we then say that 81 homes have to be a mixture of 10 years or something, then and there aren't 107 homes, then
there would still be 26. It's not a percentage, it's a figure.
yeah, but if you say that there has to be 26 social rent and 81 other affordable tenures, when the planning permission isn't for exactly 107 homes.
Oh,
it's
no,
for up
I was
to
just
107 homes.
I was just showing off my maths skills in showing the difference, the extra to get to 107, but the description of the development is still up to 107, so that wouldn't, yeah, my 81 quotes isn't relevant to that.
Yeah, but in the wording that we're proposing, I just want to make sure there is a specific number on the number of houses social rent and not a specific number on the others. So that if the development that comes forward in reserved matters is less than 107 homes, we definitely don't reduce the number of homes for social rent. It's the other tenures that would be reduced.
Yeah, that's in the section 106.
Okay.
So the section 106 will, on page 29, that's one of the obligations, that at least 26 of the homes are to be social rent, at least, not up to. So that won't change.
Okay, so we've got a proposal and seconded. So we'll take us to a vote on that proposal once Gareth has summarised what we're voting on.
Right. So I think that the recommendation is as set out on page 29 of the report, and then subject to the condition, tabled condition about glasses on, a bit easier. The phasing plan, the accommodation mix condition that was tabled will be changed, and that's delegated to officers to come up with the wording, and that's about an accommodation mix scheme, taking into account the neighbourhood plan and the housing needs assessment. There's an additional condition relating to the Natural England 21-day notice period. Section 106 would include a mix of tenures and discussion, not discussion, that's the wrong word, and key worker provision. And then there's an informative regarding the bus stop and any conflicts with the footpath cycleway. I think that's covers it all.
Of course.
What would be the pathway if Natural England maintained their objection?
I don't know.
So the recommendation we're proposing involves referral to Secretary of State already because of its green belt. So we would do that referral and give the Secretary of State 28 days to make their decision. I presume if Natural England got the notification following the committee, they weren't happy, they would make representation to the Secretary of State, and the upshot and consequence could be that the Secretary of State calls it in if they're not happy with if that's what they think following Natural England's advice. So that's a potential scenario.
I thought that was what would happen, but I wasn't sure if Natural England had a binding objection.
Okay, so It's been proposed and seconded as outlined by Gareth. So if I can see by show of hands, all those in favour of the proposal. And all those against the proposal. And any abstentions? Okay, so that's 6 in favour, 5 against, and therefore that is approved, subject to the referral to the Secretary of State. Councillor Fisher. Absolutely. Okay, we have one more item on the agenda. It's 7 o'clock. Are members happy that we plough on straight into the next item, or do we want a short adjournment? Do you have a 5-minute? We'll allow people. Right. What I'll do, I'm going to just take a very, very short adjournment. Come back at 7:05 promptly, please, and then that allows people to leave the room and Right, welcome back everybody to this evening's meeting of Planning Committee A. We are now moving on to the application for Elvington water treatment works at Kexby Lane in Elvington. I'm just going to confirm that Councillor Melly has now left the meeting and has left the room. And we're joined at the table by Lindsay Jenkins, who's the Senior Planning Officer who's been dealing with this application. So I will invite Gareth, I think, to talk us through the plans to begin with.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. So this application is for land adjacent to the Elvington water treatment works. Just me cursor down. There we go, that's better. So roughly where I'm pointing a laser pointer. There's a 3D view, which doesn't really show you a great deal more, but it does show the relationship with Elvington Village to the south and to the east of the site. Site layout plan. So this is the installation of solar photovoltaic array with associated infrastructure, including a transformer, security fencing, CCTV, temporary construction access and compound. And this is land within the general extent of the green belt. We've got a couple of, oh no, we haven't. We've got some detail of the CCTV and the sections through the solar array, and the solar array in elevation as well, and detail of the deer fencing around the site. This is the landscape and biodiversity restoration plan, showing areas of land for landscaping and biodiversity around the edge of the site. Some photographs. So just see the part of the water treatment works, grey silos against a grey sky. So that's just referring back. That photograph is taken around about here. So it shows the sort of general area of scrub. Photograph which looks back towards the village, shows that separation distance from ground level back towards the village across the fields. And this is within the site. Whoops, this is within the site. With one of the bunds around the water treatment works. So that photograph is taken roughly this location here. And just a point of information. So this is the site previously approved, as you will have seen in the papers, that we granted permission for a similar scheme back in 2019, which is now lapsed. And that was on this basis of this drawing in front of us. Again, sort of south-facing solar arrays. The scheme in front of us is a larger site, and that allows for a lot more landscaping around the site than was allowed for in this particular scheme. That's the extent of the presentation. There is a, oh yes, sorry, you've got that.
Okay, so just invite any questions from members on any points of clarification within the plans themselves, any detail of the plans, or are you all happy that you understand them? Yep, okay. In which case, if you'd like to go on to your update.
Right. So there is an update. Lindsay, could you take us through that? So, please.
Thank you, Gareth. So the update, we've received a further consultation response from the Ouse and Derwent Internal Drainage Board. This is following the agent responded to a number of queries that were raised by them. No objections are raised, but they did request a condition requiring an easement to the watercourse known as Horse Dyke. Officers consider that such a condition would not meet the test of a planning condition. However, these and other matters can be covered by informative. There's also an amendment to the published report clarifying the new access track to be type 3 construction rather than type 1 construction. An additional text to the paragraph 5.86, which sets out the monitoring fee of 3,300, and this is also included within the amended recommendation. And the update includes an amendment to condition 10, which covers archaeology and seeks to reduce the archaeological trenching evaluation from 4% to 3%. An additional condition requiring the construction materiality details in respect to the access track, and then the informative to cover the matters covered by the IDB. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So I'll move us then to public participation. We've got one registered speaker this evening, which is Rio Kikuchi. If you'd like to come to the table, thank you very much for the time that you've sat waiting through the previous application to come and speak. And I believe you're speaking here in support of the application. So you'll have 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll give you a little heads up if I think you're likely to run over your 3 minutes. And then if you just sit tight when you're finished in case there are any questions from members. If you just push on the microphone in front of you, there's like a little button in the middle, looks a bit like a Wi-Fi, you've got it, and that's your live. So just start when you like.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Rio Kikuchi, and I am a planner with ERM, the agent for the solar project. The NPPF is clear that planning has a key role in supporting renewable energy infrastructure. NPPF paragraph 157 states that the planning system should support the transition to a low carbon future and should support renewable and low carbon energy infrastructure. NPPF paragraph 163 states that local planning authorities should not require applicants to demonstrate the overall need for renewable energy and should approve the application if its impacts are or can be made acceptable. The applicant identified the site as potentially suitable from early feasibility work, and this has been confirmed through ongoing technical and environmental assessments. The renewable energy generated would be utilized by Yorkshire Water to directly power its operations at the Water Treatment Works facility, reducing their carbon footprint and helping to combat the impacts of climate change. The solar arrays will provide for approximately 22% of the works needs per year. Additionally, the nature of the arrangements will mean that the treatment works is less reliant on fluctuating costs of grid electricity and will help to maintain bills at one of the lowest levels in the country. Planning permission for this development was previously granted in 2016, which established the precedent for this development as appropriate for this site. The planning permission had lapsed as the applicant was not able to start constructing development before the expiration of 3 years from the date of the permission. Policy CC1 of the local plan encourages the development of renewable energy generation, subject to demonstrating that any impacts have been effectively mitigated. Throughout the determination period, we've worked closely with the planning officer and consultees, including local residents, to address the minimal issues raised and to mitigate the impacts of the project as much as possible. The officer's report sets out the planning balance, and significant weight is attached to the generation of renewable energy. In addition to the provision of renewable energy, the project would also deliver a scheme of landscape and ecological enhancements and provide a biodiversity net gain of 27.41% in habitat units and 53.60% in hedgerow units, far exceeding the statutory requirement of 10% B&G. We have submitted a comprehensive and robust planning application and have thoroughly assessed all the potential impacts, providing both design solutions and mitigation where required. This has resulted in no objections being raised from statutory consultees and the planning officer recommending approval of the planning application. At the in-person consultation event held back in April, residents were supportive of the development and noted the importance of renewable energy generation. The project complies with the policies within the local plan as well as national planning policy, and the development was previously approved, demonstrating the acceptability of this development in this location. Therefore, I would respectfully request that the committee follows the office's recommendation for approval and approves this application. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. You're absolutely bang on 3 minutes there, so perfect. If you just want to sit tight, I don't know if any members have any questions or anything that you want to raise. I'm not seeing any hands, so thank you very much for your. Oh, my apologies. You obviously weren't quick enough. Councillor Widdowson.
Just real dead easy one. How did you manage to get Northern Grid to let you have a connection so quickly when we all struggled? You're going to have to explain how you do that.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
You're doing 22% in covering 22% of your use at Yorkshire Water, but what your paper says is that any extra will go to the grid, which means you must have a connection to the grid. And I'm impressed, because it normally takes a very, very long time to get a connection to the grid, and you've done it in 6 years, which is quite quick. I'm being facetious.
No, I think all the renewable energy generated by this project would be going to Yorkshire. It would be going to power Yorkshire Water's operations. Yes, apologies. Yeah, it wouldn't be going to the grid, but I do. Yeah, I have heard of the timescales with getting connections to the grid. So.
Okay, I'll look more carefully this time. Any further questions? Can't see any hands, so thank you very much for your time. If you want to take your seat back in the public gallery.
Thanks very much.
So we now move on to members' questions to officers. If there's any questions or queries that you have based on the report or anything you've heard there, and Councillor Fisher.
Just to clarify, have there been any responses from Elvington Parish Council, Civil Aviation Authority, Environment Agency?
No.
No. Right, thank you.
Okay, any further questions, or are we happy to move into debate? This is going to be a record time. I'm looking for anybody who wishes to say anything in relation to debate. Councillor Fenton, I saw you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm assured that the benefits of this scheme would outweigh the harm done to what is a greenbelt site. Obviously, it's been through planning before, so that debate has been had. I see nothing in this application that would give rise to any new concerns. So I'd be supportive of what's being proposed.
Thank you. Trying to get my microphone on. I saw Councillor Stewart next, and then Councillor Fisher.
Everything about this application is very straightforward and clear and pointing in one clear direction. And I would hope we don't waste undue time discussing it. And I'll find out what Councillor Ayres' heckle was later.
Councillor Fisher.
It is a sensitive site. It's in the green belt, but I can't see any significant harm to the green belt, and it certainly doesn't impact on the incredibly important wildlife sites just down the road. So I'm happy to support this, and I recommend we don't waste too much time on it.
Okay, doke. Well, I'm not seeing anybody else itching to debate anything. It's clear that there's support in the room, so I'm happy to move to test the officer recommendation. I'll just need a proposal and a seconder. So Councillor Ben Burton first, and then I think I saw. Oh, was Jane? It's getting to that time of the evening, isn't it? Councillor Ben Burton.
Yeah, happy to propose.
Okay, and I think I saw Councillor Fenton next, actually, but anybody on this side whose hand went up, Councillor Fenton, do you want to? Happy to second. Okay, so Gareth, if you'd like to just summarise what we're voting on.
Thank you, Chair. So the recommendation ultimately for approval, but subject to the terms set out on page 73 in the recommendation, subject to the amendments and the additional conditions and informatives set out in the tabled update.
Okay, so if I could see by show of hands, all those who are in favour of the proposal, if you could raise your hand now. And anybody against that proposal? Any abstentions? So that is unanimous, and therefore planning permission is approved. Okay, that brings us to the end of the meeting. I think that's probably a record time for Committee A to deal with an application. I'm sorry you had to wait so long in order for that to happen. But thank you all for your time this evening, and that concludes today's meeting.